Daris gets his first credit card at 21, a $500 limit. He doesn't read the terms. Nobody does. The card feels like free money. It isn't. It's a loan that resets every month, charged at a rate that would be illegal if a person tried to charge it to another person directly. 21.5%. That's the average interest rate on American credit card debt in 2025. Daris doesn't know that number yet. He just knows the card lets him buy things he can't otherwise afford, and the minimum payment is small enough to ignore the rest. He uses it for what most people use it for. Not luxury, a car repair he didn't see coming, a few months where rent and groceries didn't quite add up, a medical bill that arrived without warning. 73% of all credit card debt in America comes from exactly this. Not vacations, not splurges, just the gap between what life costs and what people have. By 23, Daris owes $6,700, the national average. He makes the minimum payment most months, $150. He doesn't realize what that $150 is actually doing.
At 21.5% interest, a $6,700 balance, paid down at $150 a month, takes Daris closer to 8 years to clear. Total interest paid over that time, more than $7,000, on a debt that started at $6,700. He will pay more in interest than he originally borrowed. This is the version of debt almost everyone learns first. Debt as a trap. Debt as the thing that takes a small problem and turns it into a permanent monthly subtraction from a life that was already tight. Daris stops checking his statement for a while. Not because the number gets better, because looking at it doesn't change it, and looking at it makes the rest of the week harder. What he doesn't know, what almost nobody in his position is taught, is that debt itself isn't the problem. The terms are. Somewhere else in the economy, people are borrowing larger amounts of money on better terms against assets that grow instead of disappear, and using that exact same tool, debt, to get richer instead of poorer. Daris is paying 21% on debt that bought things that are already gone. Somewhere else, someone is paying 7% on debt secured by something that's still growing in value while they hold it.
Daris meets a man named Andre at a friend's dinner. Andre owns a portfolio of stocks worth $11 million. He built most of it over 15 years, mostly in one company's shares that did very well. Andre mentions, almost casually, that he hasn't sold a single share in 6 years. He also mentions he bought a house last year, and a boat, and paid for his daughter's wedding. Daris asks how, if he hasn't sold anything. Andre explains something called a securities-backed line of credit. He walks Daris through it in under 2 minutes, the way someone explains something they've stopped finding remarkable. You don't sell the stock. Selling triggers capital gains tax. In Andre's bracket, that's a real cost on every dollar of profit. Instead, you pledge the stock as collateral to a bank. The bank lends you cash against it, usually 50 to 95% of the portfolio's value. You pay interest on what you borrow. Right now, that rate is somewhere between 6 and 9%. Daris does the comparison in his head before Andre finishes the sentence. 6 to 9%. His credit card, 21.5. Same tool, different terms, different planet.
Daris asks the obvious question. Why would a bank lend someone money instead of just letting them sell the stock? Because the bank isn't taking the risk Daris assumed it was taking. Andre's $11 million portfolio backs the loan. If Andre borrows $2 million against it, well within the bank's lending limits, the bank holds collateral worth more than 5 times what it lent. If the stock drops, the bank can demand more collateral or force a sale before they're ever at risk of losing money. The loan isn't free money, it's debt, and debt has to be repaid. But here's the part that changes everything. The IRS does not tax loan proceeds. Borrowing $11 million against a portfolio is not a taxable event, the same way Daris's credit card cash advance wasn't taxed. The only difference is what backs it and at what rate. Federal Reserve data from 2024 shows roughly $138 billion in these loans outstanding nationally, and they are held almost entirely by high net worth households.
This isn't a secret loophole used by a handful of people. It's a structural feature of how the wealthy interact with debt, used at scale, every day, completely legally. Andre's portfolio, meanwhile, keeps growing. Stock market history suggests it grows faster, on average, than the interest rate on his loan, which means the debt is shrinking relative to his net worth, even while the balance technically exists.
Andre tells Daris there's a name for what he's doing. Economists call it buy, borrow, die. You buy assets that appreciate. Stocks, real estate, a business. You borrow against them instead of selling, which means you get cash without ever triggering a capital gains tax bill. And eventually, when you die, your heirs inherit those assets at their current market value, a tax provision called step-up in basis, which means decades of growth can pass to the next generation without ever being taxed at all. Your estate uses a portion of the assets to pay off the loan. The rest, often still worth far more than the original debt, passes on. It sounds almost too clean. Daris asks what happens if the market crashes. Andre's answer is honest. That's the actual risk. If the portfolio's value drops sharply, the bank can issue a margin call, demanding more collateral or forcing a sale. It's not available to someone with a $500 credit limit and no portfolio. But it is available, structurally, to far more people than use it, mostly because nobody teaches it. Daris thinks about his own life and realizes there's a version of this he already has access to and has never used. His apartment is rented, but his parents own their home. They bought it 18 years ago for $210,000. Today, it's worth roughly $490,000. They've paid the mortgage down to $120,000 remaining. That's $270,000 of equity sitting in a house, doing nothing, while his mother carries $11,000 in credit card debt at 23% interest, almost the exact same situation Daris is in, just one generation up. A cash-out refinance, or a home equity line of credit, would let her borrow against that $270,000 at roughly 6 to 9%, the same range as Andre's portfolio loan, because the principal is identical. The house is the collateral. The bank takes far less risk than it does lending unsecured credit card debt, so it charges far less for the privilege. $11,000 moved from a 23% card to an 8% home equity line doesn't erase the debt, but it cuts the interest cost by more than half immediately.
Daris doesn't have an $11 million stock portfolio. He doesn't own a house. He has $6,700 of credit card debt at 21.5% and a job, and a slowly improving understanding of what debt actually is. He starts with the only lever available to him at his level, a balance transfer to a card offering 0% interest for 15 months and a personal consolidation loan at 9% for the remainder, cutting his effective rate by more than half overnight, the same principle Andre and his mother used, just at a smaller scale and with fewer assets to leverage. He also starts buying, slowly, into an index fund. Not because $11 million is realistic anytime soon, because the entire buy, borrow, die mechanism requires step 1, owning something that appreciates, before step 2 is ever possible. Every dollar he puts into an asset today is a dollar that, decades from now, could be a foundation he borrows against, instead of a hole he digs deeper. The credit card got him into debt that made him poorer with every payment. The index fund and the eventual home equity, used the same way Andre uses his portfolio, would be debt that makes him richer with every payment, because the asset behind it keeps growing, while the loan, used carefully, stays a fraction of its value. Here's what Daris understands now that he didn't understand at 21. Debt was never the villain. Debt is a tool, a way to access money today against value that exists now or will exist later. The credit card and the securities-backed line of credit are, mechanically, almost the same instrument. Borrowed money, repaid with interest, available without selling anything first. The difference that actually matters is what backs the loan and what the money was used for. Borrow against something that depreciates, a lifestyle, a past expense, nothing that grows, at a rate above 20%,
and debt compounds against you year after year until the original problem is buried under interest payments 3 times its size. Borrow against something that appreciates, a portfolio, a property, a business, at a rate that historically sits below what that asset earns, and the same tool works in reverse. The debt becomes a way to access capital without ever giving up the asset that's making you wealthier in the background. Same word, same mechanism, opposite outcome, entirely determined by which side of that equation you're standing on. Daris is 26 now. He still has debt. It's a different kind than the debt he had at 21. Smaller, cheaper, and for the first time attached to something that's actually growing. That's the whole difference. And almost nobody tells you it exists